If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story. Officer Maria Daniels sat behind the wheel of her patrol car, staring out at the sun setting over the horizon. It was a typical evening shift, the streets bathed in the orange glow of dusk. For most, it would have been a peaceful time, traffic winding down, people finishing up their work, going home. But for Maria, this was the calm before the storm. She had been tracking a gang known for terrorizing the city, an outlaw biker gang, the Iron Reapers. Their crimes were legendary: drug trafficking, armed robbery, assaults, and extortion. They were known for their cruelty, especially towards those who stood in their way. The gang's leader, Blaze Razor McCree, was as dangerous as they came: ruthless, calculating, and unhinged. Maria had been hunting them for months, and she was determined to bring them down. Beside her in the passenger seat was her canine partner, Max. He was a large German shepherd, his eyes sharp and alert, always ready for action. They had been through many dangerous situations together. He was more than just a partner, he was family. Maria trusted Max with her life, and Max trusted her in return. Tonight they were on a special assignment. Intelligence had suggested that the Iron Reapers were planning something big, something that would shake the community to its core. Maria didn't know the details yet, but she had a bad feeling. The last time they had intercepted the gang, it had ended in chaos, with innocent lives lost. Maria wasn't going to let that happen again. Max's ears perked up, and Maria immediately knew something was wrong. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she glanced in the rearview mirror. A motorcycle revved loudly in the distance. Two more followed. The Iron Reapers. It was them, and they were getting closer. "Hold on, Max," Maria whispered, her voice steely with resolve. Max growled low, as if sensing the tension in the air. The bikers were notorious for their brutal tactics, violent, unforgiving, and ruthless in their pursuit of power. They would stop at nothing to achieve their goals, and they had no qualms about shedding blood in the process. Maria gripped the steering wheel tightly, her jaw clenched in determination. This was it. She was about to confront the gang once and for all. The city was at stake, and she wouldn't let them win. As the bikers approached, Maria switched on the siren, signaling them to pull over. The motorcycles roared to life as they sped past, ignoring her orders. Without hesitation, Maria floored the gas pedal and sped after them. She knew the danger of chasing them, but she also knew she couldn't let them slip away again. This was her chance to stop them. The bikers glanced back, sneering at the patrol car in pursuit. They weren't worried. They knew they had the upper hand. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as the chase intensified. Max was already on high alert, barking furiously from the back seat, sensing the danger ahead. Suddenly, the bikers turned down an alleyway, the tires screeching as they made a sharp left. Maria followed, her headlights cutting through the darkness, determined not to lose them. The alley was narrow, and the bikers weaved in and out of the shadows, taking dangerous turns that only a skilled rider could navigate. Max barked again, more urgently now, as if warning her. Maria's instincts kicked in, her years of experience guiding her every move. She wasn't just chasing these criminals. She was hunting them, and she wouldn't stop until they were taken down. At the end of the alley, the bikers skidded to a halt in front of an abandoned warehouse. They turned their bikes off, the engines still humming faintly in the silence. The gang dismounted, their faces hidden behind helmets, their dark clothing blending with the night. There were 6 of them in total, all members of the Iron Reapers. Blaze Razor McCree, the leader, stood tall and imposing in the center. His cold eyes locked onto Maria's car as she parked a few yards away. He wasn't surprised to see her. He'd known she was coming, and he was ready. Maria stepped out of the car, her hand resting on the holster at her side. Max jumped out after her, his muscles taut, ready to spring into action. The tension between them was palpable. Max knew what was coming, and so did she. "You shouldn't have followed us, Daniels." Blaze's voice was cold, mocking. "Now you're going to pay the price." Maria didn't flinch. "I'm not here to negotiate, McCree. I'm here to arrest you and end your reign of terror." The bikers laughed, the sound dark and menacing. Blaze stepped forward, his grin widening. "That's cute," he sneered. "You think you can stop us? We own this town." You're just a cop with a dog, nothing more. Max growled, his teeth showing as he stood by Maria's side, ready for whatever came next. You and your gang won't terrorize this city anymore, Maria said firmly, her voice unwavering. This ends tonight. Blaze's eyes flicked to his men, and he nodded. In an instant, the gang moved. One of the bikers rushed toward Maria, swinging a crowbar. Maria dodged the attack with military precision, pulling her firearm and firing a warning shot into the air. The biker stopped in his tracks, hesitating for a split second. Get back, or I'll take you down, Maria warned, her voice sharp. But the biker didn't listen. He lunged at her again. This time, Max was ready. He darted forward, tackling the biker to the ground with a force that sent a sickening crack through the air. The biker screamed in pain as Max's jaws clamped down on his arm, pinning him to the asphalt. Blaze barked in order, and his men surged forward, surrounding Maria and Max. The fight was just beginning, and Maria knew she had to be fast. She couldn't let them get the upper hand. Chapter 2, the brutal showdown. The night air was thick with tension. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement, while the distant hum of the city seemed muffled by the mounting violence in the alley. Maria stood her ground, her grip tightening on her firearm. Max, still holding the biker beneath him, growled menacingly, his body a perfect shield between his partner and the gang. The remaining bikers circled, sizing up their opponents. There were 6 of them, all well-built, tattooed, and hardened by years of lawlessness. The air crackled with violence. One of them, a tall figure with a snake tattoo wrapping around his neck, cracked his knuckles and stepped forward. "You're not walking out of here, Daniels," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You think your dog can stop us? He's about to be put down just like you." Max barked, the sound loud and commanding. It was more than just a warning. It was a promise. Maria could feel the tension in his muscles, his instincts primed for the fight. She didn't respond to the biker's taunt. Instead, she moved slowly, positioning herself in front of Max, her body steady but alert. She had trained for moments like this, where fear was a luxury and survival was the only objective. As the gang began to close in, Maria didn't hesitate. She aimed her gun at the nearest biker, the one who had first attacked her. His eyes widened, realizing that the tables had turned, but it was too late. The shot rang out, loud and sharp, piercing the stillness of the night. The biker dropped to the ground with a sickening thud, a spray of red marking the concrete beneath him. The gang recoiled, the shock of the first casualty freezing them in place for a fraction of a second. It was all Maria needed. Her training kicked in. She moved swiftly, taking cover behind an old dumpster and reloading her gun in a smooth, practiced motion. Max was already on the move, his focus solely on the nearest threat. The other bikers were forced to adjust, trying to regain their composure in the face of the sudden violence. Blaze, the leader, stood at the back of the group watching the scene unfold. He gritted his teeth, anger flashing in his eyes. He wasn't just a gang leader. He was a predator, and right now he was the one being hunted. He had underestimated Maria and her canine partner, and that mistake was about to cost him dearly. "Get her, you idiots!" Blaze roared. His voice echoed through the alley, laced with fury and desperation. "She's just one cop, and that dog is nothing but a mutt." But his words only fueled the chaos. One of his men, a bulky biker with a skull tattoo across his chest, charged at Maria. Max was on him in an instant, the sound of his paw pounding the pavement mixing with the biker's screams. The man swung wildly with a wrench, but Max ducked, dodging the blow and launching himself at the biker's legs, knocking him to the ground. Maria watched the fight unfold, her eyes narrowing with cold precision. The gang's bravado was fading. They were beginning to realize that they weren't just up against a cop and her dog, they were up against a force they couldn't control. Another biker lunged at her, a crowbar raised high above his head, but Maria was faster. She sidestepped, spinning around to face him. With a swift motion, she kicked out, catching him in the ribs and sending him crashing into the wall. The impact left him dazed, struggling to breathe as he slumped to the ground. Maria wasn't done. She advanced on the fallen man, her gun trained on his chest. "Move again, and I'll put you down," she warned coldly. The remaining bikers were beginning to show signs of fear. They had underestimated her, underestimated Max. What they thought would be an easy confrontation was turning into a nightmare. The gang, once unified in their cruelty, now hesitated, their confidence faltering. Blaze's fury reached its boiling point. His eyes glinted with madness, and he stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. He pulled out a switchblade from his belt and flicked it open. "I'll show you what happens when you mess with the Iron Reapers," he spat, the blade gleaming menacingly in the dim light. Maria didn't flinch. She had seen men like him before, people who believed they were untouchable, who thrived on fear and violence. But she knew better. She wasn't afraid of men like Blaze McCree. She was going to end him. Max stood at her side, his stance poised and ready. They were a team, and Blaze had no idea how dangerous they could be when they worked together. As Blaze lunged forward, slashing the air with his blade, Max moved with lightning speed, tackling the gang leader to the ground. The knife flew from Blaze's hand as Max held him in a vice-like grip, pinning him to the pavement. Maria stepped forward, her gun aimed directly at Blaze's head. "This is the end for you, McCree," she said, her voice hard as steel. But Blaze was not finished. He spat in her face, a final act of defiance. His eyes burned with hatred, and he struggled beneath Max's hold, trying to free himself. "You think you've won?" Blaze growled. "You think the Iron Reapers are just going to fold? This city is ours, and nothing is going to stop us." Maria wiped the spit from her face, her expression unwavering. "It ends tonight," she said, her voice filled with finality. Max growled, sensing the gang leader's desperation. Maria's hand tightened around her gun, and with a single decisive movement, she pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot echoed down the alley, the bullet finding its mark with deadly precision. Blaze McCree's body went limp, his struggle ceasing. The gang leader was dead. The remaining bikers froze, their eyes wide with shock. They had never expected this. They had thought Maria and Max would be easy targets, just another cop and her dog. But they were wrong. The Iron Reapers, for all their terror, had underestimated the determination and strength of the law. Maria stood over Blaze's body, her gun still aimed at the remaining bikers. "Any of you want to end up like him?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. "You walk away now, or I'll make sure you don't get another chance." The bikers exchanged nervous glances, fear creeping into their hearts. One by one, they dropped their weapons, surrendering to the inevitable. Max barked loudly, asserting his dominance, and the last of the gang's will to fight crumbled. As Maria cuffed the last of the bikers, she turned to Max, her partner, and gave him a small, approving nod. "We did it, buddy." Max's tail wagged, and for a moment, Maria allowed herself a brief moment of relief. They had stopped the gang, but the job wasn't over. Not yet. The morning sun broke through the horizon, casting a golden hue over the city. The streets that had once been filled with fear and the iron grip of the Iron Reapers were now quiet. Maria and Max stood side by side, the weight of their actions settling over them. The bikers had been taken into custody, their reign of terror finally brought to an end. But Maria knew this wasn't the end of the story. She stood on the steps of the police precinct, her eyes scanning the horizon, still filled with that sense of unfinished business. Blaze McCree might be gone, but Maria knew the roots of the gang's power ran deep, much deeper than just one leader. And there was always the possibility of someone else rising to take his place. Max sat patiently at her feet, his gaze alert, sensing her unease. Maria crouched down beside him, her fingers running through his fur, taking solace in the comfort of his steady presence. He had saved her life more than once. Now it was her turn to ensure that the city would remain safe from the storm that was still brewing beneath the surface. The quiet of the morning was soon broken by the arrival of Detective Carter, her stern face already set with determination. She approached Maria quickly, her footsteps firm on the cracked pavement. "You've done it, Maria," she said, her voice low but filled with respect. "You stopped them. McCree's gone, and the bikers will face charges. But there's more to this." Maria stood up, her gaze meeting Carter's. "I know. This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Carter nodded. "We've got word that McCree had more than just his gang working for him. There's someone higher up, pulling the strings. We need to move quickly, or this could spiral out of control." Maria felt her blood run cold. She knew what that meant. The Iron Reapers were only a small part of a much larger machine. Someone with more power, more resources, and more influence had been behind it all. Someone who thought they could control everything, who believed they could get away with murder, terror, and oppression. Max growled low in his throat as if sensing Maria's thoughts. He had always been in tune with her instincts, and right now her instincts told her that the city was not yet safe. "What do we know about this higher up?" Maria asked, her voice steady despite the growing weight of the task ahead. Carter pulled out a folder from her bag and handed it to Maria. Inside were pictures, surveillance footage, and documents. A man in a dark suit appeared in the images, standing beside McCree in several photos, always in the shadows, always hidden behind a mask of power. "This is our guy," Carter said, pointing to the man in the pictures. "His name is Richard Bishop, a real estate mogul, but he's got connections everywhere. Politicians, law enforcement, business owners, you name it. He's been buying up properties around the city, driving people out and replacing them with his own people. The bounties McCree was offering? Those were a way for him to clean up the neighborhoods, get rid of anyone standing in his way." Maria stared at the pictures, her fists clenched. "So he's the mastermind. He's been behind it all." Carter nodded grimly. "Yes, and we believe he's got an even bigger operation going. McCree was just his enforcer, a tool to keep things under control. But now that McCree's out of the picture, we have a chance to take Bishop down." Maria stood tall, the determination surging through her veins. "We'll get him, but we need to be smart. Bishop's not going to be an easy target." "Agreed," Carter said, her eyes sharp. "We can't rush in blindly. We'll need evidence, proof, and we'll need to move fast." Maria turned to Max, her hand resting on his head. "You ready, boy?" she asked softly. Max's tail wagged, his sharp eyes never leaving her face. He was more than ready. "We'll start by gathering intel," Maria continued, her voice hardening with resolve. "We need to know where he's hiding, where his operations are. He'll have a fortress somewhere, and when we find it, we'll bring him down." As Maria turned to walk toward her car, Carter by her side, she felt a surge of anger. Richard Bishop, hiding behind his wealth and connections, had thought he could buy the city. He thought he could control it, like a puppet master pulling the strings. But he had underestimated Maria Daniels, her canine partner, and the unyielding determination that coursed through them both. Maria spent the next few days tracking down every lead she could find. She knew she was getting closer. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Bishop's reach was vast, but every empire had its weak spots, and Maria intended to find them. Max was by her side every step of the way, his sharp instincts guiding her through the gritty underbelly of the city. They visited local businesses, questioning owners, making contact with anyone who might know something. Some were too afraid to speak, their faces pinched with fear at the mere mention of Bishop's name. Others, though, offered what little information they could, names of people they'd seen coming and going from Bishop's properties, a glimpse of the man in the shadows of a local warehouse. With each passing day, Maria pieced together a clearer picture of Bishop's operations. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a shadow kingpin, using his wealth to control the city from behind the scenes. His influence extended deep into the police force, the city council, and even the media. He had managed to remain untouchable for years, manipulating those around him to do his bidding. But now Maria was closing in on him. It wasn't long before she caught her first break. A reliable informant, a former associate of Bishop's who had fallen out of favor, contacted her. He was terrified, but he was willing to talk. "Look, I don't know if you'll believe me, but Bishop's got a private compound on the outskirts of the city, a place that no one knows about. He keeps it hidden, but it's where all the real work happens. I've seen things there, things I can't even describe," the informant told her, his voice trembling. Maria's heart raced. This was it. The compound would be the key to taking Bishop down. Max barked, his ears perked as if understanding the significance of the news. Maria nodded to him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "We're going to end this, Max. For good." She turned to Carter, who was still on the case, helping Maria track down the compound. Together they prepared for the raid that would bring down Bishop and expose his corrupt empire. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not this time. The day of the raid finally arrived. The air was thick with anticipation, and Maria could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. The pieces were finally in place. After days of careful planning, the time had come to take down Richard Bishop and expose his criminal empire for the world to see. The informant's intel had been invaluable. He had provided the exact location of the private compound, a sprawling mansion hidden deep in the woods just outside the city. Maria stood in front of her car, the engine running as she reviewed the plan one last time. The compound was heavily fortified, with guards posted around the perimeter and security cameras everywhere. Bishop had spared no expense in making sure his hideaway remained impenetrable. But Maria had a secret weapon, the element of surprise. She looked down at Max, who sat by her side, his ears alert, his eyes sharp. The canine had always been more than just a partner to her. He was family. And today, they would bring justice to those who had suffered under Bishop's reign of terror. "We go in quiet, Max," Maria whispered, her voice low and determined. "We hit them fast, and we hit them hard." Max's tail flicked once in acknowledgement. He knew the plan, he knew the stakes. Maria climbed into the driver's seat, and Carter slid in beside her. The drive out to the compound was long, the roads winding through dense forests that seemed to stretch for miles. The closer they got, the more Maria's mind raced. She knew that taking down Bishop was only part of the battle. The real challenge would come after, the fight to dismantle the network of corruption that had allowed someone like Bishop to rise to power in the first place. The compound was nestled on the edge of a large, overgrown estate, the mansion at its center looming like a fortress. The sky was dark, the moon barely visible behind a thick blanket of clouds. It was the perfect night for a raid. As they approached the compound, Maria signaled for the team to stop. She had mapped out their entry points. They couldn't afford to rush in and alert the guards. They needed to catch them off guard. Carter nodded, her face set in a grim line. "All right, everyone knows the plan. We move in pairs. We stay in the shadows. No noise. We'll secure the perimeter first, then move in on the house." Maria didn't wait for any further instructions. She turned to Max and whispered, "Let's go." Max barked quietly, ready for action. He had always been a step ahead of her in moments like these, anticipating her every move. Together they moved through the trees, blending in with the darkness, taking cover in the shadows cast by the tall walls of the compound. They reached the outer wall of the compound without incident. The perimeter was tight, but Maria had expected that. The guards patrolled in intervals, walking in patterns that Maria and her team had studied. It was a game of timing, and Maria was patient. Max remained perfectly still by her side, his breathing slow and steady. His eyes followed every movement of the guards, and when one of them turned his back, Maria made her move. She darted across the open space, moving like a shadow. Max followed, his agility allowing him to cover the distance in mere seconds. They reached the outer gate where a guard stood smoking, completely unaware of the danger approaching. Maria gave a small hand signal, and Max lunged. The guard didn't even have time to react as Max grabbed him by the arm, pulling him to the ground with a force that knocked the air from his lungs. Maria was right behind him, pulling the guard's weapon from its holster and pointing it at his head. "Don't move," Maria whispered harshly. "You make a sound, and I won't hesitate." The guard's eyes widened in fear, but Maria knew he wouldn't try anything foolish. She quickly secured him, tying his hands behind his back with the rope she'd brought. Max stood over the guard, his teeth bared in a silent warning. Carter and the rest of the team moved quickly, taking out the remaining guards in silent takedowns. Within minutes, the perimeter was secure. Maria felt her pulse quicken as they moved toward the mansion. The mansion loomed before them now, its windows dark, its gates tall and imposing. Maria could feel the weight of this situation. This wasn't just about bringing down a criminal. It was about taking a stand against the system that allowed people like Bishop to flourish unchecked. The world had to see the truth. They reached the main entrance, a large wooden door reinforced with steel. Maria took a deep breath, signaling for Carter to cover her. She moved to the door, her heart pounding, knowing that this could be the most dangerous part of the operation. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. But Maria was a professional. She had trained for moments like this. With a quick motion, she kicked the door open, the impact sending it crashing to the ground. The sound reverberated through the mansion like a gunshot. "Police, hands in the air," Maria shouted, her voice cutting through the silence of the mansion. The team flooded into the building, their weapons drawn, sweeping the rooms with precision. They moved from room to room, clearing the house, until they finally reached the study at the back of the mansion. And there he was, Richard Bishop, the man who had thought he could control the entire city, who had made a fortune off of the suffering of others, was sitting calmly behind a desk, his expression cold, his eyes unwavering. "You should have stayed in the shadows, Bishop," Maria said, her voice tight with anger. Bishop smirked, leaning back in his chair. "You think this is over? You think you've won? You've only scratched the surface." "Get up," Maria ordered, her weapon still aimed at him. Bishop stood slowly, his hands raised in mock surrender. "You think you can stop me? I have more power than you could ever imagine. You're nothing but pawns in a much larger game." Maria's blood boiled at his words, but she kept her composure. She had the evidence now, and she wouldn't let him get away with it. "You've been a plague on this city for too long, Bishop. It ends today." Bishop's eyes flickered with something, fear, perhaps, but he quickly masked it with a cold laugh. "You'll never bring me down. You think the system cares about one man? The system is built on people like me." Maria stepped forward, her voice steady. "The system doesn't matter anymore. You're done." As the officers cuffed Bishop and led him away, Maria's heart was still pounding. The raid had gone as planned, but it wasn't the victory she had hoped for. She had taken down a monster, but the real work, the real fight, was just beginning. Max stood by her side, his gaze alert, as always. Maria ran her hand over his head, grateful for the support he had given her throughout this entire mission. "Good boy," she whispered softly, looking out the window as Bishop was loaded into the police car. "We did it." But as they watched the convoy drive away, Maria knew that this wasn't over. The fight for justice, for fairness, was a long and brutal road. Bishop might be behind bars, but there were others out there just like him, others who thought they could hide in the shadows, unpunished. Maria clenched her fist. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. And with Max by her side, there was no challenge they couldn't face. The night air was thick with tension as Maria and her team made their final approach to the bikers' hideout. They had been tracking the gang's every move, and now it had all led to this, a confrontation that would determine whether the streets would remain under the control of ruthless criminals or if justice would finally prevail. Max, the loyal K-9 officer, had been left for dead after the bikers brutalized him. His breathing was shallow, his body covered in cuts and bruises, but his will to fight was far from extinguished. The gang had underestimated the bond between Max and Maria, but now they were about to learn that Maria would go to any lengths to protect her partner. Max had been a warrior, and Maria was not about to let him fall without ensuring the bikers paid for their cruelty. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as she reviewed the intel they had gathered. Max's whereabouts were confirmed. He was still alive, but barely. The gang had taken him to a remote location just outside the city, and they had been torturing him for hours. The brutality had been beyond anything Maria could stomach. She had seen violence, had faced life-or-death situations. But what the bikers had done to Max was something different. It was not just an attack on a K-9, it was an attack on the very thing she stood for: justice, loyalty, and protection. "Move out," Maria barked to her team, her voice cold and commanding. "We get Max, and we end this tonight." The squad moved quickly, the crunch of boots against the dirt road the only sound cutting through the night. Maria's hand tightened around the grip of her weapon as she mentally prepared herself for what was to come. She wasn't just going in to take down a gang of bikers. No, this was personal. The bikers had crossed a line when they hurt Max. The bikers, camped in a makeshift hideout on the outskirts of town, were celebrating their twisted victory. Kane, the leader, stood proudly in front of the group, taunting Max, who lay bloodied and broken at his feet. The gang surrounded him like vultures, relishing in the fear and pain they had caused. Kane's voice was a sickening mixture of arrogance and amusement as he knelt down to Max's side, his eyes glinting with malice. "You really thought you could stop us, didn't you? You and your pathetic little partner." Max's eyes flickered open, blood mixing with dirt on his fur, but the fire within him burned bright. He couldn't move much, but he wasn't dead yet. His bond with Maria kept him alive, kept him fighting through the pain. One of the bikers, a particularly cruel-looking man with tattoos crawling up his neck, crouched down beside Kane. "We should finish him off. We've made our point. Kane's eyes narrowed and he turned his gaze to Max. No, this is a message to the cops, to Maria. We don't just kill, we make them suffer. This dog isn't dying tonight. With that, Kane stood up, pulling a large knife from his waistband. He looked down at Max with a sneer, ready to carve another wound into the already battered canine. Max whimpered in pain, but he wasn't ready to let them have the satisfaction of seeing him broken. He locked eyes with Kane, his resolve unshaken. Just as Kane raised the knife high above his head, a deafening noise pierced the night air, the sound of approaching sirens. The bikers froze, their smug expressions quickly replaced by panic. Kane cursed under his breath. Shit, they're here. Get ready to move, now! Maria and her team arrived at the hideout, the harsh lights of their vehicles cutting through the darkness. The bikers scrambled to react, but they were caught off guard. Maria had been waiting for this moment for days. She had prepared for every possible outcome, but now it was time to act. Go, 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 Maria shouted, rushing toward the entrance of the hideout. Her officers fanned out, ready for a fight. Maria's eyes locked onto the figure of Kane, who had already begun to retreat with Max in tow. She couldn't let him get away, not after everything the bikers had done. The K9 was close to death, and Kane was the key to stopping the rest of his crew from wreaking havoc on the streets. Max was barely hanging on, his body limp as Kane dragged him toward the back of the camp. The gang members, some of them still reeling from the realization that they were about to be caught, began to move in uncoordinated chaos. The bikers were used to intimidating the streets, but they were about to find out that the law wasn't backing down any longer. Hold the line, Maria barked at her team, rushing forward. Her eyes were fixed on Max. The bikers drew weapons as Maria and her team closed in. Kane's voice rang out, filled with desperate fury. You think you can stop us, Maria? You think you're going to make me pay for this? We'll see who the real victors are. Max's strength was fading, but his ears perked up at the sound of familiar voices. Maria, his handler, his friend. With every ounce of strength he had left, Max turned his head, barely able to lift his body. He saw Maria at the entrance of the camp, guns drawn, her team behind her. The bikers were scrambling, but Maria's presence was commanding. They weren't in control anymore. Kane turned to face Maria, a wild look in his eyes. You're too late, he spat. We already won. Maria's expression was a mixture of rage and determination. You haven't won anything, she said coldly. Not yet. Before anyone could react, Maria and her team burst forward. Shots were fired, and the bikers returned fire. But Maria's squad was well prepared. The fight that ensued was brutal. Maria and her officers were trained to handle situations just like this one. Every move, every shot, was executed with precision. The bikers, on the other hand, had no discipline. They were no match for the tactical expertise of the police force. Max could barely move, his body still a mangled mess, but his heart raced with anticipation. He knew Maria would come for him. She would always come for him. As the last biker fell to the ground, the camp was secured. Kane was finally caught in the crossfire. His pride shattered as he was handcuffed and thrown to the ground. He cursed at Maria, but she paid him no mind. Maria's focus remained on Max, her heart in her throat as she rushed to his side. Stay with me, buddy, she whispered, her voice shaky as she crouched down beside him. Max's tail twitched, but he couldn't do much else. Blood pooled around him, staining the dirt beneath. His eyes flickered as Maria gently cradled his head in her lap, her hands trembling. You're going to be okay, she said, more to herself than to Max. Max's breathing was slow and labored, but there was a light in his eyes that told Maria he wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Maria's heart swelled with relief, but there was no time for rest. She knew this was only the beginning. The bikers were down, but their operations were vast. Kane would talk, and Maria would make sure the entire syndicate was brought to justice. But right now, her focus was on Max. As the team called for an ambulance and began securing the perimeter, Maria stayed by Max's side, watching over him with a fierce protectiveness. The streets would be safer tonight, but the fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. Maria glanced at her team, a fire igniting in her eyes. We clean up the streets tonight. We stop them all. This ends now. Max's ear twitched as if in agreement. Maria wasn't going to let them win. The bikers had made a mistake. They had underestimated her, underestimated Max. The law was coming for them, and this time they wouldn't escape. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.